Thank you, Darrell. And I was talking to you earlier. I didn't get to thank my law partner because he's right. I do take on a lot of civil rights causes, police brutality causes, just unbelievable causes. I think about Kendrick Johnson in Valdosta, Georgia, who they claim climbed into a wrestling mat, got stuck and died, and told his parents that was the cause of death, and he didn't get any due process beyond that. And the reason I get to do all these things is my law partner, who is the businessman in the firm, will say, Crump, I don't know how you're going to do it. We're going to spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of resources, and at the end of the day, there's still no guarantee anything's going to happen and that's where I'll start my conversation with you. And I know I had this whole technical thing I was doing for the ABA, Professor Ogletree, and then I heard Sabrina get up there and start pulling on the heartstrings, and I said, I'm most affected when I talk from the heart. So I got these notes, and I may look at them at some point, but I just want to talk to you from the heart if I can, because as lawyers, it is about our ability to communicate. And so I want to take you back to February 26, 2012, and tell the story from our perspective. I was in Jacksonville, Florida, never forget it, working on another case. Attorney O'Neill knows the story. On another case where a young black child had been shot by this young white student through the windowsill. And the Jacksonville State Attorney didn't see fit to charge anybody with the crime, even though they were playing and the kid said he was going to shoot them, and they had 2 witnesses, and the mother had 12 guns in the house. And so I'm fighting that battle in court, and my phone just keeps going off, and it's going off. And so finally I leave court and take the call, and it's 2 lawyers from Miami, Florida, Attorney Tyrone Williams and Attorney Patricia Jones, and they are National Bar Association members who Darrell has been president of the National Bar Association. And they say, Attorney Crump, we gotta get your help on this case. And I say, okay, what are you talking about? And y'all blowing me up, what happened? And they say, we have Tracy Martin on the phone. His son was killed, and we should let you tell you about it. And Tracy Martin tells me, Professor Ogletree, and I hear it in his voice, and he sounds so hopeless and so desperate. And he says, my son Trayvon was 17 years old. He was walking home from the 7-Eleven. He had a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea, and the neighborhood watch man shot him and killed him. And the police said they're not going to arrest him. So I need your help to try to get justice for my son. And I said, hold on, let me make sure I understand this, Mr. Martin. Your son was unarmed, walking home, all he had was Skittles and iced tea, and the neighborhood watch volunteer had a gun? I'm scratching my head saying, well, nah, that just don't sound right. And he said, that's it, and because of this stand your ground law, the police said that they are not going to arrest him. And I stepped back for a second, Professor Ogletree, and I said, hold on, you don't need me for this, Mr. Martin. Give it a couple of days. They're going to arrest him. You see, we're lawyers. We're officers of the court. And we have seen people in our community, little black and little brown boys, man, they get arrested with no evidence at all. A hypothesis, a theory. Somebody thought you might have been there. And here you had a dead child a person with a gun and admitted to shooting him. And the police said they're not going to arrest him. I said, give it a couple of days. You don't need me on this case. And a couple of days went by. And Mr. Martin called me back. And he said, you see, Attorney Crump, I told you they are not going to arrest him. And I said, well, okay, Mr. Martin, we'll do what we can do. And I remember this like yesterday, Sabrina. I called Parks and we are talking, and I tell Daryl about the conversation, and Daryl, as being the prudent, objective lawyer and businessman, says, we're going to probably do a lot of stuff, Ben. We're going to spend all the resources and time and the money, and at the end of the day, they probably still ain't going to arrest him. And I remember him saying, but if you believe in it, I'm with you and we'll do what we can. And that was the beginning, because I do believe God gives us these talents and these blessings to see what we're going to do with them. And when the bell rings, when nobody's watching, I believe God is watching to say, are you going to answer the bell? You know, are you going to answer the bell for the least of ye? And that was one of our moments there, because I've often heard many lawyers say, a lot of people wouldn't have touched Trayvon case. You know, think about the facts when they're presented to you. The police certainly believed the killer's version, and a lot of American society, you know, believe the stereotypes. I've often said it was bad that George Zimmerman profiled Trayvon Martin. I believe it's far worse that our institution of criminal justice profiled Trayvon Martin. You see, and it bears repeating, and we'll talk a little bit about the Million Hoodie Rally, because I think what Sabrina said there was so riveting. But that night when they got there on February 26th, they did not do a blood and alcohol analysis of the killer, but they did one on Trayvon. They didn't do a background check on the killer, but they did one on Trayvon. I mean, it's like everything this killer said of killing this unarmed kid, they took it as the gospel, as the pure tea gospel. And how do we know? Because they put it all in their reports. They didn't really do an investigation. They didn't go knock on doors saying, maybe this is somebody's child who live in this community. They took his word. And don't Trayvon have the right to due process of the law, to have a proper and fair investigation? Because we know without a shadow of a doubt, if the shoe was on the other foot. And can you just imagine, just think for a second, if Trayvon Martin would have shot and killed unarmed George Zimmerman, he could have said, self-defense, stand your ground. He could have said whatever he wanted to say. He was going to be arrested that hour, that minute, that second, if he wouldn't have been shot. It would have been clear. And remember this here. The night Trayvon was killed, you know, right now it was the biggest news story in 2013, and you had I Am Trayvon and the international community all was looking at it. But on that night when Trayvon was killed, there was only one news outlet in Orlando, Florida. And Orlando, Florida has about 70 news outlets. Only one covered the story, and it was only a 37-second story on the news that night. And so when we started, you know, Daryl and I and Attorney Jasmine Rand, we wrote a letter to the police department just saying, can you relook at this? We understand that there's a 911 tape, and that they told him not to pursue Trayvon and stuff. And instead of responding back to us, what they did, they had a press conference and they drew a line in the sand of saying why they were not going to arrest the killer of Trayvon Martin. And that was the response. And then when we started trying to get the media to cover it, nobody would cover the story. You know, and we didn't talk about race or anything because we just thought it was bad enough. And I remember talking to Attorney Natalie Jackson, and she, God knows, was tremendous because she was from Sanford, Florida, and our local council. And we thought it was bad enough that a kid who was unarmed was killed by a neighborhood watch volunteer. We thought you cover it for that reason. We only have to talk about the divisive issue of race. And we couldn't get anybody to cover it. And thank God for you young people. Thank God for you young people. I see my frat brother out there. I thank God for all you young people who got on social media, Facebook and Twitter, and social media drove major media to cover the Trayvon Martin story. And without you all, it wouldn't be covered. It would not be covered. And I especially have to thank Kevin, who was a law student at Howard University. And you know, every time, Professor Ogletree, when they say one person can't change something, I think about this law student at Howard University who started the Change.org petition saying the killer of Trayvon Martin should at least be arrested and have to come before trial by jury of his peers, at least. And he started that petition, and over 2.5 million people signed that petition, the largest petition in Change.org's history. So don't ever be discouraged just because you're the only one who are standing up for right. You just keep standing, and God will take over from there. So we are now starting to get some traction on the case, and about a month later, and Sabrina, she remembered, and I remember we come to New York City because we're still trying to get the killer arrested. It's about a month out, and you know, as Darryl said, there's no guarantee he's ever going to be arrested. There's no guarantee that Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin even has to have the killer of their unarmed son face the evidence against him. No guarantee whatsoever. So we come to New York City and we're doing all these interviews. I mean, we interview for everybody. Good Morning America, Today Show, The View, Anderson Cooper. We're just trying to tell the story, get the story out. And finally we end with Reverend Al Sharpton on Politics Nation. And Reverend Al says, you know, there's some, I have my radio program, and I thank Professor Ogletree, he's going to try to get us on there today, but I have my radio program, and the kids been calling in. They're having this hoodie rally, and I'm going to date myself now, date Sabrina too. We said hoodie rally. We had no idea what they was talking about, hoodie rally. We was trying to figure it out, and he said, yeah, these young people want to do this rally to show support for you all, and it's going to be over at Grant Park. Maybe y'all can go over and say thank you. And so you have to remember, we're doing all these interviews, and God bless Sabrina and Tracy. They're doing everything that Darryl and I asked them to do. We're doing interview after interview, and it's emotional. Because at the end of every interview, you know how it ends. Sabrina knows that it ends with her 17-year-old child being shot in the heart and he's never coming back. And so it's emotional, and you know, a lot of crying in interviews, and they're emotionally spent. And on top of that, Sabrina has a head cold. It's not a good day for her, even though I'm steady trying to push, and she say I sometimes push it too hard. Reverend Al said, well, if you can just go over and just say thank you for a second. And I feel a sense of obligation to the young people, so I'm really saying, if we can, you know, Sabrina, I'm a lawyer. I do most of the talking. I run my mouth for a living. And Tracy, we'll get him to talking. All you really have to do is say thank you. And plus, I'm thinking it's only going to be 100 or maybe 200 students. We're over 1,000 miles from Florida, and this is New York, and nobody never really heard of Sanford, Florida, so it ain't going to be that many people there. And so we finally agree that we'll do it, and so we leave 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and we go over a couple of blocks to Grant Park. And I have to tell you all, you can't predict this stuff. It's just God. We get over there, and it is 30,000 people who have assembled on Grant Park, and they got hoodies on and signs, and they're yelling, "I am Trayvon," and you just think, wow, that's just God. There's no way you can even predict something like that. And you got to remember, this was all the young people that wasn't playing. They found out we were coming to New York, and in 24 hours, the young people, Professor Ogletree, they got on Twitter and Facebook, and they started saying, we got to come out and support Trayvon's parents and stuff. And in a 24-hour period, they got that many people assembled in Grant Park. And, it cut into CNN and NBC and everything. You all saw it on the news. And you thought we were surprised. Boy, NYPD, they were like, what the heck? They didn't know what to do. And so it was just people everywhere. And so they got us out the car, and we went through the crowd, the cameras everywhere. And, I talked, Tracy talked, and then I asked Sabrina, can you say a couple of words to the people? And I really think what she said is the most riveting thing about this whole campaign for justice for Trayvon. And she came before everybody and she said, I simply want to thank you all for standing up for my son, Trayvon Martin. But he's not just my son, he's your son. He's all our son. And if it could happen to my child, it could happen to your child. So we all have to stand up for Trayvon. We all have to stand up for justice. And the crowd went crazy, and it was just riveting. And I remember Sabrina looking at me saying, Attorney Crump, did I do okay? And I said, Sabrina, I don't think anybody, a lawyer, nobody could have said it better than that, because that's what this really was about. Trayvon could have been any child walking down that street. And that's what's so troubling about it. And if you don't believe me, you look at these other stand your ground killings that are happening everywhere. You think about Renisha McBride, 19 years old. I sometimes think about this whole just insanity of stand your ground concept with Trayvon's case, because we all objectively heard with our own ears the killer say he's running away. We heard him say that. And then within 3 minutes, there's a bullet in his heart. So how do you say Trayvon is the initial aggressor? And then you think about this Renisha McBride case in Detroit, Michigan. She knocks on the door because her car has been in a wreck. And the killer opens the door and blows her head off. And in both cases, you think they put themselves in harm's way. George Zimmerman didn't have to get out the car. The 911 operator said, we don't need you to get out the car. You think about in Detroit, he opened the door. So you put yourself in harm's way. The whole Trayvon Martin Amendment is just common sense legislation. That's what Sabrina and Tracy, Daryl, we all running around the country to say, this is common sense legislation. It stands for the proposition that you cannot be the initial aggressor. You can't start the confrontation. You can't go pick the fight and kill somebody, then put your hands up and say, I was standing my ground. It just flies in the face of all common sense. I mean, all common sense. And so what we are trying to do is tell people this is win-win legislation for everybody, because in these notes here, I mean, this law is getting ridiculously out of hand. I mean, just ridiculous. You think about Jordan Davis in Jacksonville, Florida, playing music with his friends in the car, and his killer says that the music is too loud. Instead of calling the police, what does he do? He takes the gun out and starts shooting at him because he said he felt threatened. It gets even more crazier. In these notes, there is a case in South Carolina, Darrell Now's case, going before the South Carolina Supreme Court, Professor Ogletree, and it just defies all logic. This gentleman, these are girls. These are little 15, 16-year-old girls. They have some kind of dispute at the club. They come home from the club. The other girls are supposed to be in the car chasing her, allegedly. She gets home. The father comes out with his gun, and the father has a sign in his window that says, I shoot first and ask questions later. That's in his sign and in his window. So his daughter and her friends come in and say, the girls are following me and stuff. The father takes his gun out and goes outside. Apparently the car's there. There's another car, somebody who's trying to help his daughter, her friend. Well, he shoots, because nobody waits for the police. They just take the law into their own hands with the stand your ground law. He shoots at the car. He's a bad shot or something. Doesn't shoot the girl's car, shoots the boy's car, kills this 16-year-old kid. He says he was standing his ground. He is convicted in South Carolina. The judge overturns the conviction and says that he had reasonable fear. He can stand his ground. So if you are coming and you're threatening me, but you're just an innocent bystander, and I now shoot and kill you, the law is expanding to what nobody wanted it to be, because now they're saying, we don't even hold you accountable for killing the innocent bystander. And you're like, is this the Wild Wild West? I mean, where does it stop? Like Sabrina said, where does it stop? And so that's what we're dealing with. I'll give you a couple more examples before I sit down. And we all know that the law back in 1921, everybody remembers Oliver Wendell Holmes. Justice Holmes said that a reasonable man believes he is in imminent danger of death and grievous bodily harm from his assailant. He may stand his ground, and if he kills him, he has not exceeded the bounds of lawful self-defense. He didn't say you don't get arrested. He don't say all that. He said, but a jury can say self-defense. And remember this question if you remember nothing else I said today, because we're lawyers. We're lawyers, and we base stuff on precedents. Stand your ground really was a solution looking for a problem. What was wrong with self-defense? Self-defense had been in the law for over 200 years and worked just fine. And so you then get into Louisiana, and I'm going to just give you 2 or 3 cases real quick. There was Hattori, a 16-year-old Japanese foreign exchange student in Louisiana who knocked on the wrong door in 1992 looking for a Halloween party. After no one answered the door, he and his friend walked back towards the car. The homeowner, Rodney Pears, having been alerted to the presence of the teens by his wife, who told him to get his gun, opened the door, told the teens to freeze. When he turned around and stepped towards the house saying simply, "We're here for the Halloween party," Pears shot him, killing him. The homeowner, Rodney Pears, 35, claimed he was frightened, so he opened fire and killed him. Neither the homeowner nor his wife ever called 911, Instead, it was the neighbors who called. Even after the shooting, the neighbors called. Although they were arrested initially, they were later charged and acquitted by a jury. And this is what Louisiana used as the basis arguments to get Stand Your Ground. A decade later said they never should have been arrested to have to pay the money out and stuff. Disregard the 16-year-old who was killed. Another example is, and you all know this case, in Texas, Torres and Ortiz, 30 years old, undocumented immigrants were caught leaving the scene of a home burglary. Neighbor Joe Horn, 62 years old, called 911. This is all recorded. This is all out there on the internet. He told the dispatcher, I got a shotgun. They are robbing another house. Do you want me to stop them? The dispatcher says, no, don't do that. The dispatcher replied, there's no property worth shooting somebody over, okay? He says, I know my rights. I have a right to stand my ground. This is what he's saying. And she said, don't leave your house. But he ignored the advice. In his breathless 911 call, he is here saying, I got a right to stand my ground, and could be heard opening his front door, rattling his shotgun and saying, hello, you all are dead. He shot Torres and Ortiz in the back, killing them both. A grand jury in Houston, Texas, declined to charge them. It just goes on from there. There's 20 examples, and I will conclude with this here. The cruel and unusual punishment and results of Stand Your Ground law. I have an article coming out in the NBA magazine that talks about Marissa Alexander in Jacksonville, Florida, who shot a warning shot and was convicted for 20 years and is still in jail now, I'm ashamed to say, because even though she's been granted a new trial, the judge said we'll get around to seeing if she can get bail in January or February, and she really wanted to be home with her children for Christmas, but that's another story. So you look at Marissa Alexander, who fired the warning shot. You look at the killer of Trayvon Martin, who killed him. And you say, what message are we sending to society? You fire a warning shot, you go to jail. But if you kill the person, your Stand Your Ground argument has a much better chance of success. And so, what's the message we're sending? What is the message we're sending? So we are here because that was a devastating verdict, heartbreaking, and you try to make sense of it. You try to make sense of it. But as the lawyer, I was really just speechless, and Daryl, and after that verdict, and it was Sabrina, believe it or not, who became the lawyer, really. She called me the next day after the verdict, and she told me she cried and prayed and cried some more. And she said, we won't let this verdict define Trayvon Martin's legacy. We will define Trayvon Martin's legacy. And so that's why we're here at Harvard, trying to define Trayvon Martin's legacy. And I hope and pray that you, as the great legal minds of the future, the best, as Sabrina said, the cream de la crop, Harvard University, who produced presidents and Supreme Court justices and captains of industry that lead the world, we invite you to help us define Trayvon Martin's legacy. Thank you.